Welcome to the Funnel Reboot Podcast with your host, Glenn Schmeltzley. Let's get into today's show.
Hey, Glenn here. Welcome to Funnel Reboot, the show for analytically minded marketers. And whether you're joining us for the first time or the 190th time today, I'm really glad you're here. So let's get straight into today's show. We've all heard about 1970's Apollo 13 mission that was supposed to send a three-man crew to the moon. But once NASA became aware of an onboard explosion, it became all about rescuing the crew. Ron Howard's 1995 movie gives a glimpse of how mission control staff in Houston reacted to the information about the explosion. When an alarm on the command module flashed, signaling a power drop, the flight director Gene Kranz, portrayed by Ed Harris, turned to the mission controller in charge of emergencies and said, "Is this an instrumentation problem, or are we looking at a real power loss here?" That officer, named Sy Liebergot and played by the director's brother, Clive Howard, then said, "It's reading a quadruple failure. That can't happen. It's gotta be instrumentation." Now, we know that by following their procedures, the NASA engineers confirmed it wasn't an instrumentation problem. The ship had actually suffered a devastating explosion and power loss, and at that point, they swung into rescue mode. Now, NASA aren't the only ones who, on seeing data put in front of them, are so quick to dismiss it. Dashboards we use in business and the work that it takes to implement them can sometimes be massive. And yet, many dashboards fail, meaning that once they're built, they never get looked at. There are those who blame technical problems for this. But just like in Apollo 13, the main failures are due to people problems. The technology can be used to visualize exactly the operational data that people literally asked for. And they can even be presented with self-serve solutions. But still, they ignore the data, waving it away as some sort of instrumentation problem when it doesn't say what they think it should. Our guest is going to tell us the right way to pull off dashboard projects. He'll show how to engage stakeholders to express what metrics they really need, ones that show how the organization is tracking towards reaching its vision. Nicholas Kelly is the principal consultant and trainer at G&K Consulting. He holds a Bachelor of Computer Science from University College Cork in Ireland. Formerly a senior manager at Deloitte, he specializes in designing and developing dashboards for global companies like banks and Formula One teams. He's a frequent speaker at conferences, and he's trained thousands of professionals on data visualization. As an educator, author, and board game designer, he has focused on using inventive methods to show people how to create dashboards that are actually used by stakeholders. And he's the recent author of the book Delivering Data Analytics. Let's go now to Seattle, where I caught up with Nick Kelly. Nick Kelly, welcome to Funnel Reboot.
Thanks for having me, Glenn. Pleasure to be here.
I'm so glad to. And what is the name of the book that we're going to talk about today?
We are talking about delivering data analytics.
Yes. So the thing that I want to focus on there is the word delivering. For any of us who have been in marketing or involved in looking at marketing data for any length of time, what we have found is that everybody starts off gung-ho with wanting to find data that can drive their business decisions. And yet, there's a landscape of lost and forgotten dashboards and data warehouse self-serve tools. There just seem to be a string of failed projects or projects that wandered away on us. Um, I I know that we often look at this technology and it can be daunting, all of the different tools, but your thesis right off the hop is it's not necessarily a technology problem, it's a people problem. Tell me what you mean.
Yeah, Glenn, one of the one of the struggles that as a consultant over the years I've been working on is not just the technology side and building dashboards and reports that are useful to folks, but over the years to make an impact, what started to become obvious was we need the people to actually adopt and use what we're building so that they're making decisions using data and of course impacting the business. So the real premise of the book is to help enable and understand what levers are available to make sure that we get people adopting and using reports, dashboards in particular, so that we're not just building up that pile of dashboards you're talking about that no one's really using, and the cost of maintenance and consumption of data, and really just helping us understand the user experience and change management aspects to make sure people are actually using data as intended. So that's the overall premise, is the human side of it, so that they are actually acting and getting value out of what people are building.
Yeah, and that you're optimistic enough to say, despite what's happened in the past, you should, if you find yourself needing a analytics view, embark on that journey. Go ahead and start. Don't be afraid. Uh, it's not going to, it's not doomed to failure. It can succeed. Now we have a few types of people who are involved here. I guess starting at small organizations. The simplest one I can think of is a frontline person who collects their own data. Let's say a marketing manager, and they want to report to their boss, and they're nervous about that. They feel that anything that they're putting together could be doomed to fail. And they're probably thinking that because are worried that the boss isn't going to like the bad news that the data is telling. Um, you say actually that this is it's a different kind of problem. You make the point that if it's not delivered well, that the messenger of the data is more at risk of being viewed as obscuring the data, and that the user, that boss, might be okay with what it has to say, but they won't be okay if it's not presented well to them to in a way that helps them see their business.
Absolutely. One, like, it's really hard. Let's say that example of you're a marketing analyst and you're doing something with the data and you're trying to present, the importance of what you're finding. And there's so many pit holes we can fall into. So like we take an example of, let's say we're trying to do marketing attribution, and we found a reasonable approach in it. We put it together in a dashboard, and we're going to present this to, the chief marketing officer, for example. And uh, well, perhaps we designed it quite poorly, so maybe it doesn't look good. The insight might be tremendous, but one of the initial barriers we're going to have is, okay, it doesn't look good, and someone who's in marketing, which is someone who's used to looking at visuals that are um, more engaging, more enticing looking, and now they're getting this report or dashboard that's not very exciting looking. So one of the gut reactions is, well, I don't like it, like
Yeah.
an emotional reaction to it, right? But there can be many other things, right? So another thing could be, it's the most wonderful looking dashboard in the world, but it's not valuable, right? The chief marketing officer looks at it and goes, well, so what? I don't care. I don't care about this. This is not interesting. And this is a real challenge that many people fall into, is we can get data, it's available, let's just build something and put it out there. And it can be very dangerous to do that. One reason is, if we don't hit the nail on the head, people then start to expect, well, they're not going to produce something that's valuable. So
Right.
the next time we produce something, people are going to be less interested in spending any time looking at it. And then over time, it compounds and it gets worse. And it's harder to drive adoption the more we do it. So there are many pitfalls. And the idea is we can start addressing these if we take a leaf out of many other books that are out there, like user experience and change management, user interface design, right? All existing best practices that are out there that aren't necessarily specific to working with data, but they're more specific to working with people. And so if we can understand those, if that, like, marketing analysts can take some of that insight on board and do go above and beyond, right? Don't just expect, I'm building this dashboard for the CMO and all I need to do is put it together and put it in a dashboard, right? That's the trap. More often than not, we also need to take ownership of those other factors that are going to affect adoption, like the look and feel, the user experience, and driving adoption, right? So there's many things that we have to consider if we want to be successful.
For sure. Those problems seem to compound as the organizations get larger. I suppose that's because you point out there are many roles involved here, everyone from the stakeholder to the business end user to the data analyst. But the issues when you get into larger teams, as you say, that I don't believe that they will help me because the last time I perceive that they let me down. This then breeds mistrust all around, where the data person will say, well, I think I know how to run the business better than the business user does because the data tells me a very obvious thing. So we have to be really careful and cognizant of the roles that each one of us have. And you actually suggest that in the early conversations, we start off taking ourselves all the way back to the vision of the business. Why do you say that?
Well, I kind of liken the whole data and the technology piece as somewhat trivial. It's not that hard to do, and I know like often, like, it does seem like it's very difficult, but when you put it in relationship to providing value to people and making an organizational impact, that's the stuff that's really hard. And the reason why we want to focus on the business side of things first, there's really no point in doing anything with data until we actually understand what's valuable to the business and our stakeholders. What do they care about? What are they motivated about? What do they get up on a Monday morning? And what motivates them? Now, in terms of business, right? Like, I have an example, Glenn, where some years ago I was working on a project, and I interviewed this person. It was a phone interview. They were based in London, and I was in Singapore at the time. And I asked them, "What's your Monday like? What's your Monday morning like?" And this, it was a chief marketing officer, senior person within a large organization.
Okay.
And he told me, he'd said to me that, "Look, Nick, I wake up Monday morning and I look at my cricket feed. I'm really interested in what's going on cricket." And I was like, well, okay, back in my head, I was like, not really what I was going for.
And that probably wasn't on the list of questions you had written down.
It wasn't. I was kind of hoping to be a bit more business oriented. And clearly, this gentleman was very motivated and excited about cricket and was passionate about it. He's telling me about all the different data sources he would use that are available publicly, right, like score predictions and all of these different things. And he was a big fan of British cricket and, of course, the English cricket team, and how they were doing against the other teams like Pakistan, India, Ireland, so forth. About half of the call, which was an hour-long interview, was just focused on cricket, and I couldn't get him off the topic. So it was clear he was interested and passionate about this. So what started to emerge was, if I'm going to get him on board, he was somewhat like pessimistic about data. And it's not because he didn't love using data, because he loved using it for cricket. He saw the value in it. His problem was the marketing data was not very good, and he didn't trust it, right? And he didn't really trust the data team behind the marketing data as well. So what it told me was, there's very little point in doing anything with data until we get the chief marketing officer on board. until we built the trust and aligned with what's valuable to the business and what's valuable to the organization first before we do anything at all. And that's just like, it's kind of like a more blatant example, Glenn, but that's very typical of steps that we need to do before we present any kind of data to anyone. Is the data culture, the data literacy, right? The human aspects of understanding what's valuable to people. And before we can do anything with our data, we really have to understand what's motivating people and why they care about data. And if they don't, how do we get them on board?
Yeah. And there's, very tried and true things that we know. We know that if you sit and break bread with people or meet them in a casual setting, that if you allow time, their nature will come out. You will get to see and actually feel their motivations, and that value, right? The things that they value will eventually come through. You may need to ask a little bit more and sometimes let the conversation wander, but you will find it. And you talk about a value mindset that we need to have to say, well, if I'm going to build you anything, I first need to understand what you value. Um, I also found it interesting that you said, don't be afraid to say to the business person, I I need to know the big objective that you're aiming for here. That takes some courage, particularly if we have juniors and seniors that are kind of not matched up very well with each other, and there's a clear difference in rank. But you do say that the person designing the dashboard has to care enough about the business that they take the time to tease those things out of the business user, right?
Absolutely. And if they don't, no one will. So that's another challenge we have. The more, like, to your point there, Glenn, like the more junior someone is to go through this sort of process, the more they need to leverage tools and accelerators and templates and various things that are going to take the attention off them and communicate that they're following a best practice. The more
Right.
senior we get into doing it, so I've been doing this for a long time now, I really don't use templates or any kind of crutches or tools anymore, just because I've been through it so often. And I feel competent and confident when I'm talking to senior stakeholders, right? I've got gray hairs and it's like, Nick's clearly been through the ringer, right? So um,
Right.
I'm more comfortable doing that. But to your point as well, like you might have that mismatch of seniority where you have, a junior analyst working with the chief marketing officer, and to feel confident, they may need to use some other things that are going to take the attention off them and focus them on, the tools are best practice. More that it's like if that senior stakeholder goes, okay, I see they're following a best practice approach, right? So they're less critical of, maybe what that person thinks, right? Because more
Right.
often than not, I mean, certainly I've seen it and I'm guilty of it myself when I was early in career, where, a great example is data visualization. And I used to, be a big proponent of data viz best practices, like the
Right.
real theoretical side of it. Never use pie charts, um,
Right.
use these exact specific colors, and never use the brand color if it's a brand red, right? These sorts of things. But over time, what I would find is it was oftentimes less friction for me to adapt what the users currently used to. So
Yes.
if their current dashboards and reports is nothing but pie charts, I'm not going to come along and say, you know what, that's a terrible chart choice. You need to go completely change it. Because I have done that and it didn't work out very well for me.
I see.
On occasion it'll work out. But if there's that existing experience there, and that was really that example of, me being junior and kind of bright eyed and having absorbed all the best practices in the world about data visualization and trying to pitch it to a senior executive who really wasn't having any of it. And then lo and behold, what I created wasn't adopted. And so,
Hmm.
so it's like we have to try and find that balance between what's a best practice, but what's also the real world. And that sort of stuff really just comes through in part through experience, right? Where
Yeah.
unfortunately I've gotten burned enough by doing that I had to tame things down and find a nice happy medium. Whereas someone who's junior in career could certainly adopt that as a process, and not have to have the heartache that many of us go through.
For sure. And it sounds like you conceded that because you didn't want to get antagonistic. And in another part of the book, you make a point about that you really need to show them that you give as much of a damn about the business as they do. You said that in when it came to interviewing these users and asking what they want. You said that the business user wants to be asked for their opinion and be a participant in a process that is ultimately going to help them. So, like, you're committed to the truth, that will commit them to the truth and to being open about what they want from this.
100%. Like quite often in the back of my head when I'm having a conversation with folks and I'm interviewing them, I'm thinking, how can I help them get a promotion? And depending on the personality of the person that I'm talking to, I might just flat out say that to them.
Yep.
How can I help you get a promotion? Right. And how can I make you succeed by using data?
Because they're spending a lot of their mental energy thinking about their job challenges. If you get them to talk about that, you point out, you're hearing the words they use, you're hearing how they frame the question. Like, you're really getting inside of that thing that they have spent a tremendous amount of time wondering about themselves. So, why wouldn't you take advantage of that? And you actually have a term for it. You call these things business value questions, BVQs. Right. What to you does a BVQ tease out?
So it's a concise way of trying to bring together several concepts that we want to keep things very simple for people, and we don't want to talk in terms of data. So that's one of the reasons why we want to just keep everything in natural language, whether it's Irish or English, Glenn, but probably not too many questions being asked of data in Irish, unfortunately. But the the idea is keep everything simple so that everyone has a seat at the table. So we don't have like a data scientist getting very technical when they're talking to someone, let's say, who's maybe less technical, right? And let's say it's the chief marketing officer. And once we get into a level of technical depth, we start to lose people. We want to keep things at the level of value and the level of the business. And so it's a forcing function that we anchor absolutely everything we're doing with our data into sets of questions, business value questions that are anchored and aligned to the business, that drive value, that are aligned to certain personas, the certain people that we're talking to, for example, the chief marketing officer. So it really, let me give an example, right, of like a business value question might be is, how much did our most recent promotion impact the sales of product X, right, in the last 6 months or whatever it is. Right. So that's like, well, okay. So the point of that question is to understand marketing attribution. We know what our marketing spend was and how did it impact sales, right? So like, that's getting right down to it. I mean, what chief marketing officer doesn't want to know the level of marketing attribution, right, that their team's being, driving for sales, right? So that's sort of what we're looking for. And we don't want it too high level. We don't want to say like, are we winning, right? It's kind of nebulous.
Yeah.
Right. And but we don't want it too much in the weeds either, right? So we want kind of that happy balance.
Well, I think in the weeds happens. Technology can sometimes be the fault of why we get into the weeds, because they have, and at least SaaS point solutions will have something that opens up usually right away called a dashboard. And so it is suggesting across the thousands of users that are on this multi-tenancy platform, what a dashboard would be good for. And we sometimes as business users fall prey to that. And it's, I think, the purpose of the business value question to yank us out of that and let us, look up at the ceiling for a moment and say, okay, well, what do I really want to know? If I had the widest possible latitude in what could be answered by the data around me, what would I imagine I want to know?
I love that. I love that idea, Glenn. It's like just taking a breath and taking the time to evaluate what would be helpful to the business and to help move things along. And like you're saying there, I mean, it's very tempting once we have access to data to just jump in and start doing stuff. And sometimes that's great, and sometimes it's entirely the right thing to do and it's appropriate. Other times, though, we might just be constraining ourselves to the data that's just available, right? And not really think further afield. For example, maybe, let's say we come up with like 50 business questions that are really useful to answer from the business. And maybe only 10 of them have data available to actually answer them. And
Yeah.
there's 40 on the table that is like, well, you know what? 10 of those, we don't even know where we could get that data from. But it's opening the door to have a conversation about, well, if it's so valuable to the business, why don't we start exploring where we could get that data from or what proxies we could use? And,
Yeah.
There was one project we worked on where we noticed for sales, VPs of sales, that we'd found in the data, most of those folks, if they were not successful in their sales role, had a small internal network. So there was just this internal correlation
Yes.
that if they didn't have a large internal network within this multinational organization, it was highly correlated with poor sales performance. And that was not a question that would have been asked if we're just looking at the exact data that's available. But because the team had an open mind and was willing to explore it, we came up with a proxy for what that was, which was we have the Outlook Exchange server, and we don't know the content of the email, but we know who's emailing who and how often. And so we came up with this measure that would just say, well, if you're considered a small network, or you have a small internal network, if you communicate with less than 5 other people within a given week. And so there was this, kind of somewhat arbitrary. It had to be tested in the model first, but that came up with a proxy, right? Because there wasn't a field in the data that says size of internal network.
No.
We had to come up with this proxy to help us understand it. And it was by asking these questions, open-ended questions, without any look and view at the data initially, to say what would be very good to know and help us start to understand what's going on with the VP of sales, that we could ask these questions first and then figure out where we're going to get the data from. And of course, sometimes we're not going to get the data at all, right? But at least we're opening the door to have a conversation about, okay, do we need to buy more data sources? Do we need to use proxies? Like, what can we do to be able to answer these questions?
Yeah, and I at that particular point in the book, what I felt great about that was that the data people are kind of taking a peek around the corner. They're not fully looking at the data sources yet, but they're doing just a little bit of quality checking, or as you say, discovering proxies. And I've been in situations where I know that would have been reassuring to the business users who are, bearing their soul with all these business value questions. But to hear the data people saying, okay, well, where we might go to get that would be this. And it's just helpful to them because I think throughout this, they want, if they're going to, keep their trust in the data people, they want to know that they're being led along a process that's going to have a good outcome. So just giving them that little check. Now, you do get into a more full-blown, let's look at the ease of use and reliability and cleanliness of data. But I really like the fact that you told one story about how even over a lunch break, I think, you had an analyst beside you and they hopped on and just ran a couple of SQL queries to see what was in a data set. And that by the time lunch had wrapped and your business users came back, they were told to what extent the questions that they dreamed up in the morning could possibly be answered.
Yeah, there was like the old school days, Glenn, where you could fly by the seat of your pants and do that stuff. It was like we used to do these things called bring your own data workshops, and
Yeah.
basically design the whole thing, plug into their data, or at least an extract of what was there, and then see what we could do really, really in a rapid way. And I still do that, but it's few and far between, given the the amount of time it needs to corral people and get them aligned. And
Or just get the authorization to access.
100%, 100%. Things are getting certainly more stringent these days, and I mean, rightly so.
Sure. But I even enjoyed, like, you gave a handy little 2x2 axis, so that people could quickly get an idea of where the where the gold is in those mines. You put I think effort, or we could
Yeah,
call it, I guess, feasibility, on one axis, low to high, and then on the other axis you put business value. And so it would be the things that are very easy to access but have high business value. Well, that seems like a good place to start. And that we may put the other ones, especially that reverse combination, we might put that to the last.
absolutely. Like when I started doing that initially, the idea was to try and get all the people in a room. Like, if you think of like just trying to do this in like a 4-hour window, where we're going to build a dashboard. And let's say it's a marketing attribution dashboard. We need the chief marketing officer in the room. We need the marketing analyst in the room. We need the data engineer in the room. We need whoever else, right? Whatever stakeholders, maybe the head of sales, right? We need them all in a room, and we need to get them aligned. And so how do we do that really fast? And one of the ways that I would often do was just basically have a sticky note. Each sticky note represents a question that the business wants to answer. And then, like you're describing that matrix, then we just have like this little X and Y axes that would write all together. I'd grab the sticky note and I can say, okay, to answer this question of marketing attribution, okay, business, how valuable is that up to you? Super valuable? Okay, let's raise it high on that chart. And okay, data person, how hard is it to answer? How much effort? Oh, let's move it to the right because that's a lot of effort. And would quickly align. It's not specific,
Hmm.
right? It's rough, but the idea
Hmm.
is to have a conversation about it and start get like sort of us oriented where we could say, okay, these sticky notes that are in the top left, high value, low effort. Let's go target those for version 1, right? Super quick and dirty, scrappy. We're not going to ignore the ones that are high value, high effort, but we're going to prioritize it, right? And say, okay, well, let's get the easy ones done first. And then maybe, in a month, 3 months, whatever it is, we can start tackling some of these questions, but let's agree and get consensus first, right? So we get the human element of it done. And like, I started doing that approach is probably around 10 years ago, Glenn. Ended up making a board game using that approach because I like
Yep.
gaming. Back in the day, I used to do a fair bit of gaming, and try and just make it accessible for everyone. Make it as non-technical as possible so that people can focus on value rather than just getting kind of mired down by what we can and can't do with the available data.
Right. And yet, there's an important kind of adult part to this, which is at least that one axis that describes effort. Implicit in that is that data is not free,
Right.
that it doesn't just come as a byproduct out of a transactional system that we use. Therefore, it's lying around and could instantly be plugged into something. It comes with an admission of, we need to find insights and extract them from that data. We need to therefore refine the data. So I think that's really important, because I think we all got lulled into it with the thought that, well, this is just something that comes after I use a piece of software or after people visit my website.
Yeah.
Yes and no. Like, just because you have that raw data doesn't mean that you're home free. Anyway, I love the ways that you've got it. The other way that I had heard it described was, imagine you're taking a grocery cart through a store, and on the aisles, on every shelf, is answers to your questions, and that you can put them into your cart. But remember, you only have a limited amount of cash in your wallet. So, choose the products and, that are within your budget to be able to answer them.
Absolutely. It's a finite resource. Agreed.
Yeah. Um, People might be wondering, I mean, we haven't even actually talked about designing dashboards yet, but you do say at this point in the book, actually, if we can get this far, we're probably past the hardest part. We do have many things left to do before we can get this, well adopted by our users. But if we've done this prep work right, it's really going to be a fairly straightforward trip from here on. And I do want to get into that, but before we do, we're going to take a really short break. I'll step away to address one thing that's been missing from Funnel Reboot: the ability to access the text of any show. I'm glad to finally announce that the podcast is now fully searchable and copyable thanks to the transcript feature in YouTube. Yes, YouTube. Now, even though the last 165 shows are audio only, they are all on YouTube. Go on to YouTube, head to Funnel Reboot's channel, and on the channel's masthead page, click the magnifying glass and search away. And while you're there, please consider subscribing to get future shows. There will be even more to say on transcripts in the coming days, but I'm pleased this capability is now available. Okay, now let's get back to the show. Nick, we're going to delve into dashboards now, and it's going to seem like quite a departure from what we were talking about, because you like to point out how much dashboards are like stories or like plays, and you explain it in terms of feedback loops. What do you mean by that?
With any biological system, pretty much any biological system, there is a mechanism for feedback to adapt to the environment, to update, feedback, change, improve, iterate. And we obviously see it in evolution in very, very long cycles, but we see it in much shorter cycles as well. And if we think of a dashboard as a living thing, and the idea of the dashboard is to firstly represent the environment. What's going on in the business environment? And let's just say we're talking about a marketing dashboard. So what's going on with our marketing campaigns, our promotions, and how is it impacting sales? So it's measuring the environment within that set of constraints. And then, well, that's great, but now we need people looking at it and getting the feedback. That's what's going on with the environment. Okay, I understand that campaign was really, really good. So maybe we want to do more of that type of campaign. The Facebook ad spend's going really well, but less so on Google AdWords, right? And so now we're going to adjust. So we're going to change our behavior, which is, okay, let's change our marketing spend. And then the dashboard needs to update. So maybe we want to have more focused deep dive on the Facebook spend, right? And get more intricate detail on that, right? And then maybe we focus less on the reporting side of Google AdWords. And so ultimately it starts to move us forward, right? Now we make more money through sales because of that marketing spend on Facebook, right? And we just continue to iterate. So we get that feedback loop. And so that's really the essence of like that sort of living dashboard notion, where we're kind of like symbiotic relationship between the people, the data, and what's going on in the environment.
Right. So yes, I think if we boil down what we're trying to accomplish here is, it's like the dashboard is the sensory organs for this biological entity, and that as their needs may shift, maybe they need better visual acuity at night, that the dashboard has to be updated to be able to provide that. And I like that. So let's flip over to the play side, because for the people who maybe didn't feel that analogy landed, let's talk about how a simple 3-step, drama, like a 3-act play, can kind of take us to what we want to think about as we're crafting a dashboard for a business user.
Absolutely. So if we think of it as like 3 very major steps, and everything I'm going to describe is agile and iterative. So, when we talk about one full cycle, it is not the be all and end all, right? So like any organism, it has to iterate. But the 3 main phases are requirements gathering, which you could also say is a user experience. So that's basically, we're focusing on the people. We're understanding, we're having conversations with them, we're figuring
the
out
setting.
Exactly, right? That's what's the setting. The next part we do is we start to envision it, right? So if we look at the first part as like setting context, the second part is visually designing that and getting feedback from our audience to make sure, okay, well, if we build this, is this going to move the needle for you? Is this going to tick all the boxes that you wanted? And the final part, and this is usually like traditionally where we start our dashboard is development, right? So part one,
Waterfall.
exactly, right? Part one, not development. Part two, not development. Part three, development is a part of a larger phase, which I call launch and adoption, right? So while development's important and we can't do anything without it, it is vitally important. I place it as the early stages of that third part, where we just really want to emphasize development's important, but what's way more important is driving adoption, right? And it kind of just sets our mind to maybe reprioritize how we typically look at a dashboard, that we need to focus on the adoption piece to make sure, like, okay, well, have we trained and enabled people properly? Is there a good data dictionary if appropriate?
Yes.
Right, like,
but
all those things.
Nick, you do realize you're using fighting words here, because if we're being heard by people who work, let's say, in a IT leaning team, maybe the way that they do dashboards is they receive a ticket,
Yes.
and all they have to do is close the ticket.
Yes.
And they're urged to do that in as quickly a way as possible. What do you recommend for people who are in that fix?
Yeah, absolutely, Glenn. And I'd say it's more common than not, really. Where I end up engaging is, in part, is trying to shift the data culture away from that sort of mindset. And so while we can't always do that, that's certainly going to be a challenge for some folks. Let's say the ideal situation is we get to influence the overall data culture of an organization and have strong adherence and a key metric around adoption, right? So you build a dashboard, well, you have to bring it to a point of 60% adoption, or whatever the metric is going to be for that organization, but that we prioritize adoption over everything else initially. And so that's one way for us to start. Now, that's top-down approach. Bottom-up approach would be to start looking at this and say, well, okay, yeah, I need to close that ticket, but wouldn't it be better if I could maybe spend a little bit more time and start showing that people are using it and getting value out of it? Right. And one of the hard things to do is when we're just focused on speed of knocking something out, is we tend to end up with low value dashboards, right? It's very hard to avoid. It's very hard to. You could be as skilled as you want, all right? Like I've been doing this stuff for years, and if I'm going to knock out a dashboard in a day, yeah, it's going to be very difficult to make that successful. And so part of the downside is sort of like this bitter pill we have to swallow, Glenn, is it's not fast. And if we want to produce something that's valuable to the organization, we have to attribute more time to it. And that might require an organizational change. And it's often why I think of this overall, like the highest value add that anyone in this sort of space in IT and data analytics, the skill set you should learn to have the biggest impact is change management, right? We're promising the world to, the day is going to change everything. It's going to transform the organization. That's the promise. That's the song we hear from data. But if we expect it to transform the organization, how on earth are we going to do that without any degree of change management? Like
that, or if the mantra is do it as fast as possible.
Right. Exactly. Right. So it becomes more just a set of motions that we're doing rather than truly transforming the organization. Right. So now we'll probably end up with some sort of medium approach to both of those, but we will really struggle if the idea is for us to just knock these things out quick and sort of hope that things are going to get better. Because what's going to happen is what you described at the start. We're going to build up this whole pile of dashboards and reports that are not valuable to anyone. And, it's like I've been working with organizations that, have over 10, 12,000 dashboards and reports that are just sitting there. And right. And they're live. No one's using them, but they're consuming resources. They're paying license fees. Right. And that is a direct byproduct of the type of mindset that's just knock it out and, respond to every single request. Let's be completely ad hoc and not really have any vision or strategy behind it, and not deliberately take time and energy to go talk to people and understand what's valuable to them.
Unless we're talking about that instance I gave at the very beginning with the single marketing manager presenting to their boss, we have to be cognizant that the person building the dashboard is not around when the user is viewing the dashboard. And so that's where your point of there being a littered landscape of unused dashboards happens. It's not good enough that we built it and stood in front of them once and said, ta-da, we haven't done enough until they can independently go in, extract what they need out of it, and then, do their job to come back to it to see if the effect was changed.
Absolutely.
And this is where, like, you bring in some really good points about agile and UI and UX that can really be brought to bear as long as both sides are committed to this iterative, exchange of ideas and feedback and working through until the dashboard reaches that point where the user is going to be watching it, and not only watching it, but suggesting how over time it can be changed to fit their reality as it changes.
100%, right? They start to get ownership and partnership in it because they care about it, because it helps them do their job. It saves them 5 hours a week, whatever it is, right? But that they get invested in it. Like it is hard. There's no two ways about it. If I'm given a bunch of data, I am super happy to just go in the corner of a room and just start building. I would much prefer that than actually going to talk to people. And I am naturally introverted, and I had to train that muscle.
Yep.
If I wanted to be successful, to go have conversations with people, and it's just hard, Glenn. Like there's no easy way around it. If we want to start building stuff that's valuable, we can get incredibly lucky, right? And guess what we think the business needs, or we have to start building up a set of skills where we can start having conversations with folks. And I mean, the good news is, right, change management's not new. User experience is not new. It's been around for years. It is just using those sets of tools and methodologies out there to help it be a bit easier for us, for those of us who don't like talking to people, to just follow like a script, like here's the 10 questions you should ask someone if you're building a dashboard,
or that you just go whole hog and hand someone a technology tool that claims to be fully self-service. Why are you laughing?
Don't get me started.
So you're not a Luddite. You do think that technology tools have a part to play, but again, you are saying, let's have a conversation. Let's have this line of inquiry, and let's use them. Let's know that people are what drives here. You say that if we hand somebody a self-service tool, we should be prepared that we're going to see some inconsistent KPIs coming out of different groups, and that assumptions about the quality of data from another group that they know nothing about, is going to start wreaking havoc with what we're looking at on our screens.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. And Glenn,
so you have to be a part of the process. You can't just abdicate responsibility and say, oh, well, they have it now.
Exactly that. And like for me with self-service, there's quite a threshold to overcome in order for it to be successful, like having good governance, having good rules around it, having good practices, standards, templates. It's like, it is tempting to roll it out because the technology exists, but without that level of governance, it is going to be the Wild West, and we're just going to have a fancier pile of crappy dashboards that no one's going to be using. That's where we end up.
What's your take on, so we're reaching the point where we are hopefully moving from wireframe to fully developed, with live production data. What's your take on how we can help when our business users clearly don't have a lot of data literacy? What are the things we can do to make them understand that they have to level up a bit in order to use this tool, that they're, use the dashboard and correctly interpret what it's saying?
Yeah. In my youth, Glenn, I used to think I could write a 100 to 200 page document and people are going to read it. And of course, we all know that is a fantasy. So And of course, who likes writing that stuff? I would absolutely have very little desire to take a whole pile of screenshots of a dashboard and talk through all the metrics and how to use it. Um, so what I end up doing now, I don't do that at all now anymore. I do, that concept of just in time, right? So just apply to training. So what's just in time training when it comes to dashboards and reports? Well, to put it into a few words, really, it's tooltips. Number one.
Yeah.
Right. You go into your dashboard and basically every metric has a tooltip that defines the calculation behind the metric. And of course, any related metadata that they need to know for that metric, as well as invariably, I will always have a landing page or a home page that is the tab that someone goes onto the very first time they're using the dashboard, which has a video on there, usually less than 2 minutes, that just gives them the cliff notes. There'll still be a link to some more robust documentation, not on the dashboard, but there'll be a link to it from the dashboard if those people are so inclined. But the assumption is people are not going to spend time consuming training content and being enabled. And the safe assumption is people will consume training if it's there in the context they care about. So what do I mean by that? Let's say we've got 5 tabs on our marketing dashboard. Someone goes into the tab on, promotions. And so they're not going to go consume video training for the 4 other tabs. They go into this promotions tab. We need to enable them there on the actual metrics they care about. Right. And that's just another part of really, if you care about driving adoption, it's a simple thing to do, but it's a high value, high impact thing for enabling people to hey, you look, if the calculation's there already, they just mouse over it and it says, this comes from this data source, this is the calculation behind it, and it's been validated by so-and-so, right? So that's one less email that's going to be sent. Or not even that. Sometimes people aren't even going to say, report back.
No,
right? They're going to get disgruntled, right? And they won't use it.
That's and mistrust the person who put it together for them.
Exactly.
I agree. And sometimes it's even the natural human thing that we forget, right? Primacy and recency. An orientation might be great, but if the orientation happens in the first quarter and you're an e-commerce store, your dashboard Black Friday, Cyber Monday tab may not be something you look at until fourth quarter. Are you going to remember what you sat through in that first quarter orientation? I doubt it. But you will be looking at the tooltips.
Absolutely. Glenn, I don't know what happened this morning, right? Like in my day. So,
That's right.
What chance do we have from a year ago? 100%.
What was for breakfast? Who knows? Right. Yeah, I'm with you, man. And you say that, what this is really breeding within our users is a concept of ownership. And I think that is the key to adoption and to getting some good ROI out of this process, because they will start to feel like they can speak up on something in particular, or they can pass up the chain something that maybe that, they know how that piece of data got there, and it's important for the next rev, for the data people to hear what they have to say. They will cough that up when they see, if I feed this to them, they're going to feed it back to me with a better dashboard.
Absolutely. Garbage in, garbage out, and quality out. One of the biggest learnings I had in my career, Glenn, was I went to a meeting with a client, a very large client, and it was a mining company, and it was my first meeting with them. In the meeting, it started out with a safety message. Tell us your safety stories. I had no idea what that was. I mean, what is this? This is weird. And each person around the table, of which there was at least 10 people there, needed to share a safety story. And the safety story was, generally a personal story. One of them was they were putting their child in the car seat on the weekend, and they noticed the strap was twisted, and the temptation was, because he was in a rush, he just said, okay, whatever, we're going, I'm just going to plug it in. And then he reminded himself. And this is what he described. He described reminding himself taking the 2 minutes to untangle the seatbelt and plug it in properly. And everyone had such a story. The reason they did this, which I found out afterwards, was they had a new chief safety officer. And like any large mining organization, very unfortunately, they have workplace deaths. And
Yeah.
the idea was to get from whatever number they were at down to zero. And so within 3 years of doing this, they had gotten down to zero workplace deaths. Now, of course, it wasn't the only thing they were doing, but it was a major tactic they had, that every single meeting, it did not matter whether it was in corporate office or on site or in the mines, wherever it was, every single meeting had to start with at least one safety message. And when I've done that with data, it has had a tremendous impact, right? So if there's one tactic you can use, if you're kind of like rolling this, trying to drive adoption within the wider organization, it is to start considering approaches that you can use to make people just more aware, more conversant, more willing to use data for their decision making, right? So if a meeting is going to happen where it would be helpful to have some marketing data there, well, then that part of the agenda is to look at the data, right? To look at whatever's available to support decision making.
Yeah, and that's how you work it into the culture.
Right.
You're making so many good points here, and it may interest you to know that specifically within the marketing analytics space, the move towards that ownership has visited people who use Google Analytics. The latest version of that software has not a set of canned dashboards, or it does, but that's not really what it's meant to be used with. Instead, the user is urged to create a library of reports which they will use frequently, and then to assemble those and have them at the ready when they open the suite. And this, for people who are not habituated to a culture of data, that's going to be a really hard transition. But for those who have started to get people wrapping their heads around, oh, well, here's where the data comes from. Here's what it means. Here's what I would do if I saw it off nominal in this area. Now we can start to say, okay, let's start to get your feet in, get your toes wet. And this is how we're going. So it's really good if people can use the advice in your book to help get them there. Nick, if people want to read the book, or they want to find out about, oh my goodness, the wireframe kits and the cards that you've got, where would you send them?
Yeah, awesome. The book Delivering Data Analytics, you get it on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all good bookstores, Glenn. And we have also some of the board game approaches that we have to wireframing and designing dashboards. They can get them off Amazon as well, the dashboard wireframe kit, as well as the newly released data storytelling cards. So if you need any help.
What are those?
Yeah, they're like a lot of cards, 234 cards that are spread across 5 categories. So we have, if you want to follow the step-by-step process to tell a compelling data story, you go through these steps of understanding your audience, setting the context, figuring out your tale or narrative, envisioning it or doing the visualization, and then how you're going to deliver it. So basically you use these cards to start structure and think about how you're going to create your data story. So that one is also on Amazon, and you can get all of those on our website as well, deliveringdataanalytics.com.
Yeah, you have a treasure trove of things, and I've said it before, I will say it again, that having those as physical manipulatives, I think allows us to get quicker results. There's just something about when our hands are holding things and our eyes are looking at them and we're moving things around, like you said with the Post-it notes. Right. We can try to use substitutes digitally, but sometimes there's just no peer to getting people together in a room and sharing stuff when you've got stuff like this out in front of you. So I'm 100%. So glad that you've made that, and I want to say thanks.
Thank you, Glenn. Much appreciated. There's some things you just can't replace. The old school low tech approach.
Yeah, that's right. This is how businesses get started, right? Nothing happens until somebody does something and somebody sells something. So, let's just not let the technology get in the way of what we're really trying to accomplish. And I think you've got a really good hack for how we can get that.
Thank you.
Nick, once again, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Glenn.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter @Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.